Hello and welcome to episode 6 of Ask the YAs. Given the current situation with police brutality and protests in America and here in the UK, our young ambassadors wanted to do something a bit different this week and have an open discussion about social media's role in activism and the current situation. Just as a disclaimer, all of the opinions shared in this discussion are our own, but Number 5 absolutely stands in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter campaign and protests. So, what is your opinion of social media and the role of an influencer?
Well, I can start. I think that social media has grown massively over the last couple of decades. I think there's a lot of press about it, both good and bad. And I think it's quite interesting to look at the different generations and how they view social media. I think it's been very, very important, especially during our current situation with COVID-19 and how there's a limited access to accurate news sources through TV, and a lot of people don't want to watch the news as such. So a good way to still keep in touch with what's going on, but in maybe a little bit more of a less intense way, is to look through sources on social media. And I do think that influencers recently have been very, very active in terms of spreading information through their platform, particularly surrounding the Black Lives Matter movement, which is obviously our focus for today. So yeah, I do think that they can have a really positive impact, but only if they use their platform for that positivity. Like, I think it's completely up to them how they are perceived, and they have to think about that when they're posting, which I think a lot of people are realizing at the moment, because there's a very big backlash over certain aspects of how people have been supporting this movement.
Okay, so I definitely think that social media, kind of similar to what Gemma said, it's like both a good and a bad thing. It really just depends on the way that people are using it and like the content that they're engaging with. And when it comes to more of the influencer side of things, I think it just depends on their intentions. Like, are they sharing it for the right reasons? Like, are they sharing it because they actually care and they actually want this change to happen? Or just because they don't want people to think that they don't care and that they're just sharing it because it's seen as a trend, not actually that's something that needs to be changed?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think most people don't realize the power that social media actually has, and a lot of people wield it in a manner that isn't beneficial. So influencers have a lot of control over like the younger generation, and they don't seem to realize that sometimes. So it's just about being aware and just making sure that you are aware of the responsibilities that come with having like a platform on social media that a lot of people access, I guess.
I don't follow any influencers per se. I feel like their degree of importance is inflated too much, because when you look at things that become trends or popular or has a big following, it's never started by influencers, it's just continued by them. I feel like they're just there to widen the spread of news rather than create news.
And on the topic of young people, can I ask what you think the effect of social media and the pressures of social media are on young people, particularly with campaigns like this one?
I don't feel like social media is as dangerous as a lot of people feel like. There's everyone talk about indoctrination and radicalizing youth through social media, and I just don't think that's true. I think that's because I'm quite strong opinionated, like quite strong headed. I'll say what I want anyway, but I feel like there is a certain degree of pressure to think in a certain way, but it does not stop anyone from what I've seen. If people want to stand with the Black Lives Matter movement, they do. If people are going to openly be racist, you see a lot of that still anyway, which I think is quite surprising and what nobody really expected.
I definitely think that Ben has a point with the whole danger of social media. I think that because there's been a lot of talk recently in the last 5 years or so about fake news, especially, social media has essentially been written off to a certain extent by teachers and by certain adults in the working world, particularly those involved in politics and such. But I have noticed that recently social media has been very keen on cracking down on that. There was a thing with Twitter, and Twitter started removing certain posts if they believe that it's spreading fake information. So I do think that recently that's been tackled, and I think you can definitely see, particularly relating to this movement, a lot of the fake news is actually the stuff you're seeing in the news because it's the edited stuff. Whereas the introduction of lives and everything, which has been a very recent development, I think has revolutionized the way that social media presents stuff. However, I have had a couple of discussions with some friends and family recently about the pressures of social media and the idea of trends and that sort of thing. And I definitely think there is an element of that. But I do think that in this particular instance, it is there's a very big, very common saying at the moment on social media that it's okay to feel uncomfortable. Like if you're not feeling uncomfortable as a white person at the moment, then you're not listening. And I think that's very true because I've definitely had a look at myself and thought, actually, there's a couple of things where I haven't actively been anti-racist, and I should have been. And I'm now trying to actively change that. So I think normalizing the fact that we're uncomfortable on social media is a whole different aspect to how we have been before, because it's always been sort of a screen that we can present ourselves however we want, where now people are being a lot more vulnerable with it, and that's actually helping. Someone who sort of emphasized this point was, I just watched a video today actually with Ellen DeGeneres and Twitch, who is involved in her show. And I know that she had a little bit of backlash from something that she posted because she didn't post enough resources. So she had this conversation with Twitch about how she didn't know what to say. And he said that staying silent is worse than saying something, making a mistake and correcting it, because she has the support of friends within the Black community who will say to her, actually, please could you reword this? And I think it's a patience thing on both sides, because as white people in general are coming to terms with certain things that they maybe haven't acted on, this is a whole new territory. But I think it's better to use social media to speak out through it, and that social media itself is not the danger. I think it amplifies the anxiety that we already have as being the people who aren't leading this movement, because it's not about us. So I don't think it's social media as a sense that is the problem. I think it's, or not the problem, but I don't think social media it's an amplification. It's not social media as a platform.
Do you think on that activism on any matter, but particularly this, using social media as its mechanism is an effective method, and why or why not?
I think it's a good start. It's a good place to start if you're quite uncertain about if you're quite confused about, where you stand in the grand scheme of things. But there's a danger that a lot of people feel like just posting on social media is enough. And then I think it's called, what is it? It's like performative allyship. I think I might not be right. I'm sorry if I'm not. But it's just that people need to recognize that, okay, you've posted on Instagram, you've like retweeted someone's story. Okay, that's good. But what else can you do? What else can you be reading? What else can you be doing to inform yourself? So there's a danger that, yes, social media is a good start to inform yourself and educate yourself about the movement. But long-term change can't be facilitated simply through like performative action. You need to educate yourself and educate people around yourself and make sure that you're having those difficult conversations surrounding this topic, I guess.
I think activism absolutely belongs on social media. I mean, there is an issue with performative allyship, but it's the best way of spreading word across countries. And this is maybe the first time ever that all 50 states have actually agreed on something. All 50 states have rioted. The UK have rioted because, well, we protested, not rioted, but because you can spread that word and you can share things that otherwise wouldn't get to be seen. And you can hide a lot of things with the media. I mean, if you look at some of the videos from the protests in America, you can see them like going after the media. They're physically hurting them. They're spraying mace at them. They're the same as protesters because they don't want anyone to know. But with social media, you can just spread that video and it reaches across countries. Everyone sees it. Activism does belong on a place where you can move word fast. That's how it should be.
I think it's also a really good place for people who maybe aren't ready to have those difficult conversations at home, because it may not be like a safe enough space for them to do so, that they can still get their voice heard and then still educate themselves kind of in a more safer area. But similar to what we've been saying, it's a good stepping stone and it's a great support network for it and for education, but you can't just stop there.
So it's about potentially it starting online, but once you go offline, all of those things that you believe in carrying off into the world and being part of your being rather than just part of your Instagram page.
I do think we have to not forget that social media is a platform. It's designed to show aspects of your life, not your life in general. And I think how you portray yourself on social media is very interesting in terms of how people perceive you. And I definitely think activism is, as Fen and Sanj have said, just it's such a good way to actually just spread the word. And I think that's the most important thing, especially about starting a movement or encouraging this. But I think it really is interesting how social media has been used, because in some aspects, in some places, for instance, the protest walks have been organised on social media. They've been really successful, but in other cases they haven't really been talked about on social media, and that means that a lot of people haven't had access to that information, which I think can be harmful to the protest. So it's really interesting thinking about how this was sort of organised before we had this, because now we rely on social media so much for spreading word that we've sort of forgotten how it happened before. But it's as Fen said, like, it's reached all 50 states and I think 18 other countries, and I don't think any of that would have been possible without social media. So I think it's really important in today's society, but I'm not saying that it hasn't been possible in the past to have a successful protest without it.
So have you been sharing stuff on social media about the Black Lives Matter campaign? And if so, why? And how does the stuff that you've been sharing make you feel?
I've shared a lot on my Facebook in particular, not really on my other platforms, because I like to keep it localized to one area. Otherwise, everyone's seeing the same stuff from me everywhere, which, yeah, would be useful. But I feel like it's better to almost stop and not post anything on the others because it's not important at the time. So on my Facebook, I share a lot of videos from the protests and a lot of things.
Sound's gone.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah. So a lot of things that you don't necessarily see on the news. So the fact that they are attacking press, you have it in video footage, you know that it's happening, but it's obviously not being shown on press. But also, I feel like you can't just share videos. So I also share posts about the best charities to donate to at this time. You've got the Minnesota Memorial Fund, which has now, I think, stopped taking money because it reached its limit. You've got the George Floyd Memorial Fund. You've got Campaign Zero, which comes up with genuine, real ideas on how to pull back on systemic racism. So if you fund that, then it actually puts in like training programs with police about police brutality. It's really good and helpful. So I feel like it's good to share and get the word out. But if you're not doing something productive like donating or saying where you can donate or preparing people for protests and not getting involved in, then there's no point in doing it almost.
something that's in. Oh, sorry, Abby, you go.
Sure. Okay, so I was going to say it took me a while to share stuff, mainly because I was working and I hadn't had the time to fully look into what I wanted to share, which I think to some people maybe came across that I didn't want to share stuff, but it was the fact that I didn't know what I wanted to share and find something that I thought would be useful for other people who didn't know, because there's a lot of the same stuff being shared, so I wanted to try and find some different things to share. And also I didn't want people to think I was just sharing because I felt like I had to share, like, because I think some people feel that way. So I was trying to find stuff that I really resonated with and that I thought would be really useful for people to be seeing.
I agree with Abby. I think there's a certain fear that's going around where people are afraid that if they don't speak out about this issue, they'll be judged. So for many people, it's just like a tick box to just post. Like, for instance, a couple of days ago, was it on Tuesday when they had the Blackout Tuesday and people just posted Black Spes. So a lot of people I found who hadn't spoken about not only this movement, but any political issue or any like current issue in general, they don't normally talk about, they posted a square. It was almost like a tick box just to get it done, just to make sure that other people don't question where your support lies with this movement. But yeah, that's something I recently noticed. I've been posting a lot on Instagram, but I try making a point not to regurgitate the same information that other people are posting. So over the past few days, I've been reading a lot of articles and a lot of books, and I'm trying to stuff that I find very interesting. I just put it on my platform and like show people where to access the same resources that I've been using and that I found helpful. So yeah.
At the same time,
Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, at the same time, I think that it's good that so many people that normally wouldn't post about activism are posting, because at this point, silence is violence. You know, you need to make yourself clear on where you stand on this issue because it's really important.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much what everyone said, but just to touch on a couple of the points. Sanj was saying about the black square, and I think that's an interesting one because I saw a lot of people just post the black square and the hashtag Blackout Tuesday that haven't said anything or haven't used that time to share any videos or any sources. And it's really particularly interesting when certain people in those groups I know have made comments before. Like, I've been to school with them and they've made comments, but it's very difficult because at the moment it's a very dangerous balance between thinking about what is happening now and what is happening in the past, and sort of thinking about the idea of redeeming and not understanding what you were doing before. Like, as a common thing is that racism comes from ignorance, or it's taught, it's not born. So it's thinking about how that has happened, how they were reacting like that, and how they can now essentially redeem that behaviour and change their attitude. But if they're just posting a black square, for me, it doesn't feel like they're redeeming themselves for the conversations that they have had in the past, not with me especially, but like in when I was there. So that's an interesting one. I know that me personally, there was a lot of people going around and saying this isn't helping, or don't use the Black Lives Matter thing, and I think that was a very blurred thing, because I think the post itself and the idea of it is actually very, very important, because if people have access to these sources that are being shared, so someone was following Sanj or Fen and they saw these sources, they would then see it. But I know that for ages I didn't even like watch Instagram stories. That just wasn't something that I did. So I definitely think that some people aren't going to have seen this information if they're not following the right people or they're not looking in the right places. So I think having it on the feed and seeing your whole feed fill up with a black square is really powerful, because you're thinking, what is this? And yes, that's the power of the trend, but the power of the trend in this case is actually inciting curiosity. People then explore the hashtag, understand what the hashtag is for, and then start to go, oh, actually, I didn't know about any of this, or I didn't know enough about this, and I actually want to think about it. So I think it can be a good thing in terms of using it to really make a powerful statement. Then again, I agree with what Ben and Sandra said in terms of wanting to post something on social media, as well as just posting that black square. Like, I don't think it's enough. But then also I'm very aware that you don't know what people are doing behind closed doors. Like, people could share something on social media but then not actually watch the video. You don't know. And that's what I'm bringing around to Abby's point, is that I also work quite a lot, and I also was not reluctant to post stuff, but took a while to post stuff because I was aware of the social media trend idea and I didn't want to fall into that. And also I was thinking about wanting to share something that I believed in. And a lot of these videos are very, very powerful, but are like 20 minutes. And my breaks between work are like 5 minutes. And it's not enough time for me to actually like watch this and actually connect with this and engage with it. I don't want it to just be a passing. I want to actually feel what these people are trying to get across. So I wanted to take my time before I shared and posted that stuff, which is why I personally took a long time. Yeah.
I don't like calling it a trend. I feel it sort of belittles the movement a little bit, because trends are generally seen as quite trivial and to pass quite quickly. Yeah. And I think that the terminology might be better if we said movement. Yeah, no, what I meant by that is it is a movement, but the idea of everyone doing something for something has the idea of a social media trend, which obviously this isn't a trend, this is a movement, and it's so much more powerful than a trivial trend. But what I'm saying is that the idea of a trend is so powerful in the way that it accesses people and it incites curiosity, that it actually, that concept can help the movement rather than trivializing it, if that makes sense. So yeah. I wasn't saying essentially that it is a trend, but that concept can benefit that black square posting as a movement.
I guess that it just shows the risk of it falling into the trend type mentality and therefore not lasting very long. And I think that's potentially some of the danger of social media, is that something's really big for a week and then it disappears, and it's about keeping that momentum up and keeping that movement going over social media, because things don't tend to last for very long.
Especially with the constant lowering of attention spans in the public.
So how do you think, as young ambassadors for Number 5 in particular, you can effectively use your social media platforms to not only support matters of equality, but also address the anxieties that may arise from people who are unsure how to react?
I know that when I've been sharing things, as well as sharing sort of the idea of fake news and certain resources in terms of surveys and books and articles and everything, I've been sharing a lot of things to do with how can you be a good ally, or what does it mean to be a good ally, or what to ask, questions to ask yourself if you're not sure how to act. And a lot of things focusing on the topic we're actually discussing now, and the idea of the social media pressure and what should you actually be doing, or what could you be doing rather than should be. Yeah, so I've been sharing a lot of information about that. I think maybe sharing those particular posts on my Number 5 Instagram would be a good start, because it's really getting people to look introspectively and think about where they stand and how they can help.
I think it's just important to take a stance on it, to let people know where you stand without trying to influence how other people respond, because you expect that everybody should respond in the correct way. But if they don't, it's almost like it's not your responsibility to change their mind. It's just your responsibility to say, well, this is where I stand and this is why. And if you don't agree with me, then that's your issue.
Mm.
I definitely think just when you're posting the content, if like you're keeping it in mind about who is seeing it. So if you, if you don't think it's educational, or maybe you didn't resonate with it, you maybe shouldn't be sharing it, because then again, what is the point behind you sharing that? But like what Fen said, you are making your point. You're not there to educate other people. You're letting people know where you stand. So just kind of keeping between that line is quite important. And then maybe just for people who do have like anxieties about sharing this content or seeing this content, it's just learning that we are all in a different place about where we stand, where how comfortable we are, because they just depend on maybe the backgrounds that we've come from. And like I think it was Gemma was saying that it was okay to be like, if you're not uncomfortable, then you're not in the right place.
You're not
So
listening.
yeah, so like it's okay to be feeling that way. So don't worry about it and just take the time to educate yourself maybe before you are posting the stuff, so you feel like you're sharing what you care about.
Yeah, I completely agree about the idea that individuals are in different places right now, and a lot of people have different ways of expressing and dealing with these kind of things. So some people find it comfortable to use social media as a platform to, you know, express how they feel. Some people are having difficult conversations at home, and a lot of people are trying to educate themselves. There's a lot of different like processes almost that are taking place, and it's just important that important to understand that different people have different ways of dealing with this, and in the grand scheme of things, like we shouldn't lose the momentum that's being generated right now. So yeah, I just completely agree with everything that's been echoed already as well.
I think it's important to remember that social media is not the be-all or end-all of this movement. If you don't want to share on social media, but you're actively reading and learning and educating yourself and having those conversations offline, that's just as important. And if that means that what you're doing, you go out into the world with a new perspective and a new attitude, that's just as important as sharing stuff. So don't feel that pressure to share. It's about the actions behind the sharing of that information.
Yeah.
Is there anything else anyone wants to add before we wrap up?
Don't think so.
I think one thing that shows the power of social media is how much this movement's changed just in the last couple of days. So we're on Friday the 5th now, and on Wednesday when we were having this conversation, since then more protests have been set up. There's a protest in Reading today, and the charges of the police officers in America have been hired and changed. And I think that shows the power of social media, because I'm not necessarily sure that I believe that would have happened had there not been so much momentum behind this movement. And the presence of social media has put so much more pressure on in America to do, you know, to stand up and do something about it, because it's not something that they can so easily hide from. Whereas when you have more face-to-face based protests, and if all the protests were just protests outside, you can be in your cozy office and the protests can be outside and they stay outside. But when it's much more all over social media, you can't hide from it so easily. So I do think even the last few days and how much the movement's changed since then does show the power of it. But it's important to go out and live those attitudes in the world rather than hit share and pass on the responsibility to someone else.
There's a couple of points I have, like, just to conclude what I'm thinking. One is to think about whether this would have had such a backing if it wasn't for the situation we're in with COVID-19, because not to say that the movement isn't important, it 100% is, and I am 100% behind it, and as you said, number 5 support it as well, but this isn't the first incident this has happened. It's only the fact that we've all been on social media so much because of the fact that we have essentially nothing else to do because we're all stuck inside or at home. So would this have kicked off if it wasn't for this situation? And I think that's, kicked off is the wrong word. Would this have escalated as much if it wasn't for the pandemic? And I think that's a really interesting thing to think about. And another thing to think about is, from conversations I've had with my family and from conversations I've had about other things that I believe in with my family, is that, as I mentioned before, like, racism is taught, it's not born, it's not ingrained. And if you're taught something as a child for 18 years at an institutional level, or from your parents or from family members, that has to be unlearned before you can relearn things. And I think there's two sort of attitudes going around about this. Like, one, some people are like, this needs to change now, we're angry, which I 100% understand. But I think another aspect is that change takes time. I think even me, as I said, that I've changed certain attitudes about certain things that I've done, and I've always considered myself like not racist, but obviously you question it, don't you, because there's so many questions going around about it, and I'm thinking maybe I'm not racist, but maybe there have been things that have been taught to me that I didn't realize. It's interesting how people are reacting, and I also think that it needs to be given time, but for everyone's attitudes to change, or a majority of attitudes to change, especially in maybe older generations. But I think when it comes to that, the only thing that's going to give us more time is to continue. I don't want to essentially, this is sort of similar with the idea of a trend, but essentially keep up the hype on social media, keep up that conversation on social media, maybe a better way of putting it, because escalating or elongating that time is showing that this isn't just a trend. It's showing that this isn't just something that's going to disappear. It's something that is going to remain here, and eventually it's going to mean that people are starting to engage in the content, even if they maybe stood back from it a little bit. And it may take certain people different amounts of time, because as Sanj said, everyone's at different levels at the moment, and I think we all have to understand that it has to be learnt, and it's not something that's just going to happen overnight, but we're definitely on our way, and this movement is making a difference. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realise yet, but will soon come to realise, because it is so much different, especially in my lifetime. It's the biggest thing that I've seen, and it's definitely something that I think is 100% going down in history, because it's already made such an impact.
I feel like it has been like escalated a lot more than it would have with COVID-19, but I think that's more to do with the white community. I feel like the black community are always this outraged, and most of the white people are only now realizing how much of an impact this has, and their involvement, maybe a lot of them do come out of boredom or having nothing else to do or not seeing anything else on social media, but having everyone united on that front, on the "this is wrong" idea, has put protests in such a big there's so many protesters now that police are reacting wrongly because they don't know how to. I'm not saying that I agree with the police here at all. I'm saying it's an already broken system that they're already leaning towards violence on. To have more they can't cope with is going to push them over more, and so really you have to sort of expect that level of violence from them now. And I don't think that in the past couple decades there hasn't been protests that have required this much police intervention.
I think the thing that's been really important for me to remember is that someone's had to lose their life for this to happen, and he's not the first person that's lost his life, and I'm absolutely sure he won't be the last. But you've got a big explosion over social media, but someone's had to lose their life in order for this conversation to start, and I think that's really important, because if you engage it on social media, you can forget that that's its roots and that's its core, and that this is what people experience day in, day out for their whole lives, not just for a week on social media. So I think the most important aspect of all of it for me has been remembering where it comes from and what those experiences of people must be like, and that he's got a family and a whole network of friends who are grieving, as well as experiencing all of this. And if something positive comes out of it, that's incredible, but someone had to lose their life in order for this conversation to start. So yeah, for me it's about remembering the roots of it, and that those roots continue even after this movement isn't maybe so prominent on social media. Yeah,
it's the concept of the butterfly effect, and the idea that I'm not saying that it's a small event, but a smaller event than the final result, as in one person, but then you start thinking about all the other people, and then you get angry, and then you want to do something, and then it escalates into something that is quite monumental and has had a huge impact already. And I think it's really interesting to think about how things start, and I think it's also really important to think about how things start, because as you said, and I think everyone's mentioned actually already in this conversation, that this started with one person, but did it really start with one person? It's not. It's it's just unspeakable that it had to have a death to start off people talking about mistreatment. And not just one, thousands of deaths, hundreds of deaths.
Thank you, everyone. So after this video, we're going to have lots of links with places to go and find information, different resources, different videos to watch, and the list of the organisations that we think are the best ones to support, both financially and also not financially at the moment. So please follow those links and send us any questions if you want to know any more about what we've been reading, and we'll see you all next week.